Hello, everyone. Well, we're going to pick up today where we left off. This particular lecture, I'm afraid I'm not going to make too many jokes or mug very much, because, as of this particular moment in America's history, the nation enters a rather sad period, and it's hard to joke about it. In any case, American historians sometimes compare the period between the Mexican-American War and the Civil War to the moment just before a major storm. It was a time when the growing tensions between the slaveholding South and the industrializing North were almost unbearable, but neither side yet dared to move. Both sides, though, were aware that war now seemed inevitable. The two regions of the nation simply could not seem to coexist. Economically, the South's economy was based on agriculture and slavery. The North's was based on industrialization and cheap labor, mostly from immigrants, working for very small amounts of money. This gave them little in common and much to fight about. For example, the North wanted high tariffs, taxes on imports, to force Southerners to buy their manufactured goods and not those from Europe. The South wanted no tariffs and no restrictions on the sale and import of slaves. Culturally, the North and the South viewed each other as immoral. The North objected to the South's use of slaves. The South thought that the North's underpaid working men were more degraded than the slaves were. Politically, both North and South feared that the other would gain more votes in Congress. Thus they began to battle over which side would gain the most states in the lands taken from Mexico. This last became particularly important in 1846, when a congressman named David Wilmot proposed that slavery be excluded from all the new territories. This was known as the Wilmot Proviso, and even though it didn't pass, it did terrify the South. After the Wilmot Proviso, it seemed that the slave-holding South would leave the Union, but at the last minute, Congress worked out the Compromise of 1850. In this deal, Congress managed to effectively divide the territories between North and South. Most of the northern areas were slated to be free. Texas would be a slave state, and the other, more western areas, such as New Mexico, would be left undecided. They might become free or slave, depending on future developments. As a further concession to the South, Congress passed laws requiring northern states to return runaway slaves to their masters in the South. These new laws were collectively known as the Fugitive Slave Acts. They were hugely unpopular in the North. In fact, there were riots in Boston when slaves were kidnapped and taken back to the South. This all came to a boil in 1857 when Dred Scott, the man we see here, a slave whose master had taken him from Missouri, which was a slave state, to Illinois, a free state, sued for his freedom. Ultimately, the Supreme Court judged against him and announced that no African American had any rights that a white person was bound to respect. This was a clear victory for the South, but it infuriated the North. Both the industrial North and the slaveholding South began to turn to violence to secure their positions. In the new state of Kansas, for instance, both sides sent armed settlers into the area in hopes of making it either a slave state or a free state. The two groups of settlers clashed in a small civil war that came to be known as Bleeding Kansas. The conflict was small and of little importance in itself, except for the fact that it fired the imagination of one John Brown, the man we see here. Brown was a former sheep herder and wool merchant who had become a fanatic abolitionist. He was involved in the Bleeding Kansas War and in fact commanded a group of Free State militants who committed several murders. Afterwards, He hoped to invade the South, arm slaves, and begin a guerrilla insurrection there. In 1858, he and a small band of supporters raided a federal armory at Higgins Ferry, Virginia. They were defeated, and Brown was later hanged. Brown was then seen as a martyred hero in the North, but he helped convince the South that staying in the United States would be suicidal. Meanwhile, the major American political parties were coming apart. The Whig Party disintegrated completely. The Democratic Party split into a northern and a southern half. Former Whigs and some dissident Democrats then formed a new party, the Republican Party, which was opposed to slavery and wanted to defend the Union. In 1860, the new party nominated Abraham Lincoln as its candidate. As we shall see, that would be crucial for all that followed.